Thank you, Andrea. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with Carolee, who sold her grown from scratch global business, Carolee Designs, which was one of the world's leading accessories brands, and then channeled her considerable energy and passion into improving and promoting women's health and life planning. She founded Access Circles, which is a global network of women, which in turn launched WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters, a not-for-profit whose mission is to foster and promote strategic change and to catalyze scientific discovery. Carolee, who's going to join us on screen in just a moment, and Access Circles represent and indeed are the expeditionary women who were first in their fields and who now are the first of this generation of change issues of change agents on societal issues that have stalled in many cases for years. So Carolee, I think, really is at the leading edge of righting some of the deep inequities and changing the way that we talk about those inequities in the context of women's health. With that, I think we can welcome you, Carolee, and maybe should we go ahead and put up our first slide?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Andrea and Meryl and Virginia, for that wonderfully warm welcome. The work that you're doing is outstanding. So let me start with just giving us some of the lens by which we were looking at our research, which is that women represent 50% of the workforce. They're 52% of the population. They control 60% of the wealth in the US, and they're responsible for 85% of spending, which is about $11 trillion. So when we look at women in that way, and we think about it, women drive the global economy. And they're basically driving it globally. And as the CEO of a company that employed more than 85% women, I know very firsthand that when women are pulled from the workforce because of inadequate treatment options or to care for their families, there are really economic consequences for our businesses and our economy. And so WHAM was created to bring investment into women's health research by building what we saw was missing, which was the economic and the business case for funding research on women. And we asked ourselves, what are the economic impacts of increasing investment in women's health research, and commissioned the RAND Corporation to conduct a data-driven study showing these impacts. During the past year, we studied 3 areas of disease for the WHAM report: brain health, cardiovascular disease, and autoimmune immune health. The WHAM report quantifies the economic benefits of accelerating investment in women's health by focusing on health expenditures, caregiver time loss, and lost life years. Alzheimer's disease and related dementia report is the first one to be released.
Let's take a look, maybe at that next slide, please. And, you know, Carolee, I mean, I feel like across my entire career globally, I mean, I really found that women are the ones who drive change because of this central role that they play in any society, regardless of its economic development level. You know, and I think that some of what you're highlighting in kind of the population footprint really kind of validates that for me. So looking at these first 3 disease areas, can you just say a little bit more about the top lines that you found?
Yeah, totally. I mean, first of all, as we know, women represent 2/3 of women are 2/3 of those with Alzheimer's disease. And so when you look at the economics of this, which is worth repeating, only 12% of Alzheimer's research is allocated to women, to specific women's research. Only 7% of rheumatoid arthritis, for example, is allocated, and so on, 4% of cardiac artery disease. So what's worth noting is that Alzheimer's costs the US economy $305 billion annually. 2/3 or 66% of the patients are women, but only 12% of research dollars actually goes to funding focused specifically on women. So funding it at 12%, at a 12% level for a 66% problem, how does that make sense? And, if I think back to making business decisions, I saw firsthand throughout my career that investing in women produces a significant return to the economy, intangibles, in tangible job earnings and economic productivity growth, and obviously in many other ways over time. So this really is the inverse of that. And yet globally, the US is viewed as a model of entrepreneurship and smart investment, but none of this economic data would support that.
Wow, that really is incredibly striking. Next slide, please. Let's just take one more look again at this Alzheimer's disease kind of footprint. And Carolee, maybe could you talk a little bit about what the WHAM report analysis found in terms of return on investment in research?
Yeah, if we invest $280 million, we get a 900, collectively across all three, we get a $930 million return. And for every dollar invested, we get back $2 in quality of life improvements and $1.24 in healthcare cost improvements. 2 times the investment in women's heart research. For every dollar that we generate, we get $95 to the economy, for example. So these numbers are quite staggering in that if we look at Alzheimer's, for example, Alzheimer's disease costs $305 billion a year just to the US economy alone. And again, only 12% of research funding, is focused on women. So the numbers are not, the amount of investment certainly is not aligned with the extent of the disease that's experienced in women. And women, as we know, have this disease differently than men.
Let's take a look at the other, at our next slide, please. Sort of the other 2 areas of research. And just to highlight, these are even more striking numbers, aren't they?
Right. So again, the numbers are disproportionate in that cardiac disease costs $555 billion a year to the US economy. Women are 50% more likely to die after their first heart attack, and only 4% of research funding focuses on women. And rheumatoid arthritis costs $40 billion a year to the US economy. Women are 60% of the patients, and 7% of the funding focuses on women. So those are some of the numbers. The numbers are in the Alzheimer's report that we've issued, which is our first report. There will be 3 reports. Cardiovascular disease and rheumatoid arthritis will follow in the fall. The Alzheimer's disease report can be seen in great detail at thewhamreport.org for additional data.
I really find these numbers just kind of gobsmacking because, as you alluded to, I feel like the US positions itself globally as, sort of an economic powerhouse and a leader. And why would we not be investing when a dollar returns such significant value added to our economy just through focusing on women's health research or the role of women in research into these very prevalent diseases? I mean, to me, that is so counterintuitive. I'm curious as to what kind of sparked your curiosity about moving to this kind of a data-driven model, Carolee. Can you say a word or 2?
Certainly. Throughout my business career, what I realized was that if my workforce was healthy and well, clearly there was more much higher level of productivity, attendance at every function that we might have hosted, as well as a greater level of commitment by all of the employees. And because my workforce was 85% women, I was acutely aware of those numbers. I think throughout my career, being very focused on making sure that not only was my workforce healthy and well, but that we could make a greater impact in women's health and wellness, led me to become involved in a variety of different organizations. That led to my greater understanding that it wasn't until 1993, for example, that the NIH approved the participation of women in clinical trials. And it wasn't until 2016, which is really hard to understand, that female mice were included in clinical studies. So that left, I think, and according to many of the scientists with whom we partner, that left a pretty big deficit of how we are really missing a huge amount of data on how disease affects women differentially, disproportionately, or exclusively. And without that research, obviously, we're missing a lot of the data that would make a lot of the critical decisions. And that became part of the impetus for me to move forward, because what I found myself doing was talking about either social justice, inequality, and all the good things that this does represent. But let's face it, without the data, it's very hard to have this discussion. When you start putting together data, and we engage the RAND Corporation to do so, you start putting in front of everyone hard facts that are, like you said, gobsmacking hard to, it's just hard to ignore. And this is just, I'm just giving you data that's the tip of the iceberg. So, I don't really, again, as a business person or just as an engaged citizen, how is it possible that we ignore most of our population, half our workforce, 2/3 of our wealth holders, and nearly all of our spenders? If you think about the economic impact of that alone, and if you think about the opportunity to improve by 1/2 of 1%, the numbers become pretty staggering.
They really are staggering. Let's take a look at our next slide. Just to
So
recap.
Virginia, I'm not seeing the slides, which is a bit of a problem. So which slide are you looking at now?
This is,
Case-
as you just noted, recapping kind of the population contours, Carolee.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Most of our population, half of our workforce, 2/3 of our wealth holders, and nearly all of our spenders. And as you make that business and economic case, I mean, I really do think that, there are things that we know are correct, but that presentation of cold, hard data makes an enormous difference in terms of focusing, people's mind in terms of action and driving kind of that action agenda. So let's go just to our final slide, which has the whamreport.org for those who want to take a look for that as a deeper dive. And maybe just let me turn it back to you really quickly to just talk about what you think partnership on kind of right sizing investment looks like going forward, and sort of what is our action agenda in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So the WHAM report, this first report, as I mentioned, has just been released. And so there is a tremendous amount of data online, and we're partnering with different organizations to make sure that not only are we sharing the data effectively, but trying to understand how we will implement using this data in order to create lasting and significant change. It won't happen unless all of us clearly, and this is a perfect example, the BrainTrust, it won't happen unless we're all very actively engaged in being able to talk about this data, share it, and use it in a way that is no longer just a discussion of inequality or social justice.
Wow, it's really interesting. Well, again, for a deeper dive, please visit the whamreport.org. Thank you so much, Carolee, both for your intervention today and all the work you've done to carry this forward. And with that, let's go back to you, Andrea.